I am Brother Thomas Avery, OSB, archivist at St. Jude's Mission. In the course of cataloging a cedar chest long sealed in our reliquary vault, I uncovered the abbot's 1857 transcription of Brother Elias Finch's journal. After consultation with our prior and council, I have prepared this public release as a faithful record. We do so not to stir curiosity, but to preserve a testimony that has shaped the soul of this house for generations. The pages you will read were copied with reverence and checked against the surviving fragments of the original hand. Orthography and cadence remain intact. Only marginal clarifications have been supplied where names or places had fallen to dust. May this account serve not as spectacle, but as instruction in the cost of love freely given, and the duty of returning what we borrow. From the transcription of the abbot, dated 1857, set down from the original journal of Master Elias Finch, September the 7th, in the year of grace 1689. I, Elias Finch, sometime of Maryland, and late resident in a small plantation of Pennsylvania, do undertake to keep an account of matters civil and natural, and such deaths and births as befall among us, with the course of the seasons and the conduct of our neighbors, that posterity may judge us. I am in my 31st year. I was from my youth a scholar, employed in a Romish school until certain disputes unfitted me for that service. I confess no zeal either for Papist or Puritan, being weary of men who strike one another with God's own words. If I have any zeal, it is for clarity, and for the little ones who must read before they can pray. Our settlement lies in a valley ribbed with oak and beech, where a cold wind creeps early from the west. The elders here are of the English persuasion and call themselves Reformed. They look upon me with a strict eye, yet suffer me to teach letters, numbers, and the visible arts of writing and cipher, upon condition that I do not intrude with the doctrine of Rome. I find the terms reasonable. A mind that can reckon the price of seed may one day reckon the price of its own soul. The houses are square and bare. The meeting house is plain as a graveboard. Children are many. Books are few. I bring my own paper and ink, and each morning we sit upon benches rough as bark and open the world with a horn book and a candle stump. I confess I love their questions more than a man of sense ought to love anything, for their questions do not flatter and do not accuse. They are arrows that fly straight. I am bidden sometimes to write for the elders, to set down agreements and tally stores. They prefer I keep my tongue sheathed in matters of the unseen. On this point, we are agreed. I record what can be measured. I maintain my own house with a scant garden, a rude fence, and a table that knows more ink than meat. So I begin this book. I mean to tell it as I saw it. I mean to keep to the strict road of true seeing, and if I stray, let it be to truth's right hand, and not to falsehood's left. The year is late, the light is thin, and the leaves have taken on the color of old brass. The children will come at sunrise with their slates and their hunger for sound. I shall be ready with my horn book and my candle. What else shall be asked of me I cannot foretell. September the 15th. This morning a skin of frost lies upon the pump handle and bites like a dog. Our little fields answer poorly to the hand. The corn stands with heads bowed as if ashamed of their barrenness. Some stalks have rotted where they rose. I saw a rind of black mildew about the roots, as if some inward night had crept upward through the sap. The beans have curled and fallen in upon themselves. Our pumpkins open to a white mold, which spreads like lace far too fine for honest soil. The hens lay once in 5 days, and the cow gives a thin milk that is near to blue. The elders speak gravely and consider a day of fasting. I am asked to tally stores. I find more gaps than measures. Salt is low. The last ship brought nails, but little flour. The men go into the woods and return with empty hands. They blame the Algonquin and then fall silent, for it is not arrows that keep the deer from the valley. The air carries a scent like wet stone. I do not like it. September the 24th. At the schoolhouse there is talk of hunger. Children are plain creatures. They speak of their bellies as they speak of the weather. I keep them to their letters and teach them to cipher by counting fence posts. A small girl, Ruth, asked if God keeps a book like mine where he writes what we shall eat. I told her that I write what has happened, not what will happen. She said she would ask God for the ending first. There was a laugh, very small, that seemed to warm the room. After I bid the children take their slates and not their voices, yet one by one they put aside the chalk and folded their hands. They prayed without ceremony or flourish, as children do. They named bread and heat and the health of mothers. They asked for broth that does not run thin. One boy asked that he might not see his father eat nothing again. I stood with my rod and felt a fool. It is a hard thing to tell a child to study when the belly tells a different lesson. The elders have set a public fast for the Sabbath. I am to write out the order and fix it to the meeting house door. I do so and keep my own counsel. The kettle at my hearth gave a new sound this evening, like a sigh beneath its usual wheeze. I do not like that either. September the 26th. A sermon of long duration. The people stood with the gravity of gravestones. Mothers held their little ones in stiff arms. The minister spoke of Nineveh with a voice that filled the rafters, and of famine as a scourge fitted to our sloth. He spoke also of mercy. He said that the Lord remembers dust. The word mercy fell upon us like a bird that does not trust the hand it lands upon. After the prayer, some remained to cry. I saw an old man take off his hat and look into it as if the hat might answer. I walked home with the children at my heels. I cut for them an apple in 6 parts. They thanked me as if it had been a feast. I am ashamed to set that down. September the 28th. Frost in the night has found its way beneath the door. I have stuffed the gap with rags and a page torn from an old arithmetic. The children have taken to praying at the beginning and the end of the lesson without my leave. I told them the horn book stands first and prayer next. They turned to me their patient eyes and said, "Master, the letters will keep until tomorrow, but our little brothers will not." I confess the force of this logic. I allowed them to kneel upon the bare boards, for the flesh of the knees is no part of the ration. When they rose, I thought the room warmer by a small degree, though the candle had burned to the same length. September the 30th. A wind came out of the west in the evening, and the trees spoke as if they had learned a new tongue. The sky was a sheet of iron, without star. I sat at my table and made marks to steady my mind. There were 6 logs on the hearth, and I counted them by 2s and by 3s to see if any number would make them more. A poor comfort. Near to Compline, I heard a sound like snow that has forgotten to fall. I cannot say it better. I took my cloak and went as far as the fence. There was a brightness at the edge of the orchard. It was as the heart of a pearl when one holds it against the sun. I thought it a trick of vapors. I thought of marshlight, though we have no marsh. I thought of lightning without sound, though the sky was clean. Others gathered in the lane. October the 1st. I write now with a steadier hand than I possessed an hour gone. At dusk there came a stirring in the orchard that stands between the meeting house and the lane. The wind drew back, as if it had been pulled by a hand. Then the brightness of last night took on a form that any man with unprejudiced eyes would call womanly, save that no woman has ever been shown such light for raiment. There were wings upon her back, not feathers as of goose or gull, nor the leathern sail of the bat, but a workmanship that made me think of linen in a fire. The people gathered by 1s and 2s, and then in a knot, their faces pale in the light as if the bones beneath had risen nearer the skin. The children made the first circle, as if drawn. There stood a figure in the orchard path, very still, with hair like wheat when the wind rests. I will not write angel in my book, for a word may outrun the truth that should follow it. I will only say that the form was of a woman, and that her countenance was full of sorrow, in the way a cup is full when one has poured without measure. The children crept forward until their toes touched the light and then stopped, for they are wiser than we suppose. I stepped closer with caution and counted the seconds to calm myself, for number is a rope a man may hold when the sea takes him. I told myself that what I saw was a cousining of eyes and breath upon cold air. I told myself that men see what they must see when hunger makes sermons of fog. Yet my pen trembles, and I have blotted the page twice, which I have not done since I was 12 years of age. The figure did not look first upon the men, nor upon the women, but upon the little ones. She sank until her eyes were level with theirs, and she listened. I saw the lines of care deepen in her brow, as if each face of theirs held weight. She lifted her gaze as if listening to a far room. When she opened her mouth, the sound was not loud, and yet it filled even the spaces behind the ears. She said that she had heard the little ones. She said that their words had climbed where the strong could not, and that she was sent to dwell among us for a time. She gave no name. She did not accept the hand of any who offered it. She looked upon the children and smiled as a woman does, who has found something that she had lost but never owned. I do not easily surrender my judgment. I looked for wires in the trees, and for a cunning lamp, and for a woman hired to deceive the simple. I found none of these. Give me time and a spyglass, and I shall yet name the trick. For now I set down only what the eye perceived. The children crowded close, and the men kept a distance that they called respectful. One of the boys, bony as a winter rabbit, put forth an open palm as if he would show her he had nothing to give. She looked upon that emptiness a long moment. Then she set her hand behind her shoulder and brought it forward again. And there lay in her fingers a feather small and white, with a faint shadow of gold along the shaft. She placed it in his palm and closed his fingers over it, as a mother closes a child's hand upon bread. No marvel began at once. The air did not grow sweet. The ground did not sing. There was only the quiet that follows when the heart has taken in a thing it cannot yet deny and cannot yet name. I will observe. I will keep the account exact. If this be fraud, time will strip it. If it be no fraud, time will clothe it. I am resolved to believe nothing merely because I would wish it to be so. October the 2nd. The figure abides among us without dwelling as we dwell. She takes no house. She sits beneath the old beech by the orchard. She speaks little, and when she does, it is to the children first. The elders pressed her earnestly to enter the meeting house and receive thanksgiving. She inclined her head and said that praise belongs elsewhere. The boy who received the first feather keeps it in a scrap of cloth against his breast. He took ill last night with a fever that should have carried him past the gate by morning, yet he woke cool and hungry. His mother wept upon his hair and thanked the God of Abraham aloud. Some say herbs were given in secret. I saw no herbs, only a light upon the child's face when he laid his hand over the feather. October the 3rd. At the schoolroom door there gathered more children than I have a mind to teach. The figure came at the hour of lesson and stood in the threshold. No shadow fell from her into the room, though the sun was behind her. The little ones rose as to a queen. She smiled, which was a sorrowing thing to behold, as if joy for her were not allowed to be simple. She passed among the benches and listened. A girl of 7 spoke of a night terror, and that she could not sleep for a picture of her father dead upon the floor. The figure placed her hand upon her wing and pulled, and again there was a feather. It was small, very white at the tip, with a warmth in it that my fingers felt even across the room. She put it into the girl's palm. The child's face altered as ice alters when a spring wind speaks. She sat down and learned her letter so quickly that I felt more a witness than a master. When the lesson was done, the figure withdrew to the beach. October the 4th. A light rain fell in the night that did not soak the ground but appeared to instruct it. The worst of the mildew left the corn as if it had lost heart for the fight. The beans that had gone to paper drew back toward flesh. The pumpkins took on weight like babes drinking at the breast. I went among the rows with my tally and marked these changes without granting the cause. Let the account speak for itself. In the lane, the children played more strongly. They carried their feathers wrapped in threadbare cloths. No adult has received one so far as I can learn. The figure hears the petitions of the little ones and gives, but when a grown person approaches, she bows her head and is silent, which offends some. She appears to divide mercy as a mother divides supper when there is not enough for all. October the 5th. There were more wonders, though I resist that word. A child lame from birth took 3 careful steps, holding a feather before him as a banner. He fell, then rose, then walked toward his mother with the terror of courage in his eyes. The woman gave a cry that cut the air like flint. A hawk circled and dropped upon a rat in the granary, which will preserve a little more of our doctor's herbs. I then took to weights and measures. I carried my scale to the common store and balanced last week's meal against this week's. We have gained 3 full bushels where we had expected loss. The elders said the gain was from shared discipline, and I have no wish to disturb their credit. Yet on the ledger I marked beside the sum a small sign to recall this day, for the figure stepped upward without a leg to climb upon. October the 6th. A girl named Ruth, who bears her little brother much upon her hip, brought him to the figure. The child had a rash that burned like embers across the chest. The figure placed her hand above the skin and did not touch, as if even a holy hand could bruise a tender thing. Then she plucked again from her wings. When she drew one, I thought I saw a wince in her eye and a gathering of breath. I do not press this, for I am apt to imagine suffering where none exists. She bid the girl to sing to the babe the hymn she knew best. Ruth has a small voice, but true. By night the rash had blanched at the edges, and in the morning it was a ghost of itself. October the 8th. I must write what I observed in her countenance. She grows thinner. The light that first attended her has softened. The feathers she gives are fewer in the day than before. She does not refuse the children, but she watches them go with a longing that is hard to look upon. When a boy returned to say that his sister's cough had eased, her mouth trembled as a bowstring trembles after the arrow is gone. No adult has yet been touched by her hand. When men stand before her with requests for weather and increase, she bows her head and listens as one listens to rain upon a roof. The schoolroom thrives. They come early and leave late. They read with a will. I have never loved the alphabet as I love it now upon their tongues. October the 12th. The men desire an order to this visitation. They have brought out benches and placed them in ranks. They would set hours and rotate prayers. They like things that can be charted and entered in a book. I sympathize, for I am a keeper of books myself. Yet when they shape their benches and straighten their wigs, she is not moved to join them. She remains among the saplings and the boys and girls, and the air around her is mild, though the frost stays upon the fields. I have the sense that she would be gone in a moment if the children were full. She turns her face now and again toward the high places of the sky, not with longing alone, but with the conscience of a messenger who has lingered. She gives another feather and does not count what remains. I confess my heart grows tight when I see her hand return from the wing bearing one less than before. A vessel that pours cannot remain whole forever. I know this from wells and from men, yet for the space of these few days, our valley is cradled. The children wake without cough. The woodpile seems to last. The river sounds less like a tyrant. The elders have begun to speak the word miracle in a tone that does not argue. I will keep the tally. I will watch her feathers. I will see if the light she gives is a light that empties. October the 22nd. She turned her face to the high places more often today, as one who hears a summons from above the line of clouds. Toward afternoon she lifted her hand and placed it upon the head of a boy, then upon the head of a girl, and by signs more than words made it known that she must soon depart. I do not claim to have heard a sentence shaped upon her tongue, yet the children understood. They came to me later and said the lady wishes what was lent to be returned. Ruth had curtsied and said that to borrow is to return, which is a rule we keep in the schoolhouse. I confess I felt relief. Her wings are lean as broom straw. At dusk, several small ones brought their feathers wrapped in pieces of cloth and looked about as if seeking a proper altar. I told them no altar was needed. A gift can be carried back in the same hands that received it. They stood in a little file near the orchard's edge. My heart made a motion I do not like to name. The elders called a meeting in the lane. They spoke with long mouths about stewardship. One said the feathers must belong to the common store, as harvest does, else envy will breed a winter more bitter than the last. Another said that if the lady is truly sent, she will not ask back what heaven has bestowed. I reminded them that the children received first, and that it was for the children to answer her. A third elder declared that children cannot be trusted to weigh a pearl against a crust. I kept my temper by counting the knots in his staff. Before sunset, a man I will not name offered bread in exchange for a feather. Bread is a poor price for what gave bread its meaning. I saw 2 false feathers also, cut from a goose and rubbed with yellow dust. October the 23rd. At dawn, the children gathered in a line as neat as any drill, each with a small parcel wrapped in cloth. I had swept the schoolroom early and stood by to count, for I thought a tally might ease the minds of men. The shining figure held out the fold of her robe, and the children laid their feathers there one by one. The robe took light as dew takes the morning. I thought to see the wings mend. I cannot say that I did, only that hope looked different upon her face. Midway through the returning, Elder Hawk stepped forward with a list. He asked that the feathers be weighed and recorded as town property, then issued again under warrant. He spoke of order and godly commonwealths. Mothers drew close about their little ones. A woman cried that her babe had slept for the first time in weeks. She would not risk a night without the token. Hawks lifted his palm in calm and asked for duty. The calm did not take. A man seized the cloth from his daughter's hands and declared that fathers must answer for blessings as for sin. The girl wept and would have given the feather herself. The father told her that the house must be kept, that a man answers for his own, that the world is a wolf, and the wolf eats last what is well guarded. His hand shook. The girl called his name. The lady rose and watched. I looked for a sign upon her face and found grief that seemed to learn new depths while I witnessed it. I prevailed upon the men to let the children finish. Some did, some did not. By noon, a portion had been returned, and a portion had vanished into sleeves and pockets that would not be searched. When the figure raised her arms a little, the wings trembled. She set them down again with a sigh that wounded me to hear. October the 30th. The talk in the houses is of keeping and of leaving. The elders write resolves and nail them to the meeting-house door. I was asked to copy the words, and I did so with a heart that would not hold still. They speak of custody of tokens, of public safety, of temptations that attend sudden bounty. They do not speak of the children, save in one line that says, their affections must be guided. I saw Ruth in the lane with her bundle and her brother upon her hip. A kinsman stopped her and set his hand upon the cloth. He said that grown folk must judge times and seasons. Ruth said that the lady had asked for what was hers. He looked at me and I told him the schoolmaster's rule, which is that borrowing is holy only when returning is possible. He did not answer me, but he took the cloth and turned away. The feather slipped from the fold and touched the dust. Ruth gathered it up with such care as would shame a priest. Toward evening, the shining figure spoke again. She said that mercy for a season accomplishes the season, and that a messenger who tarries becomes a snare to those who love the message. The men afterward held council at the storehouse. I was present with the ledger. They propose a rotation by which feathers shall be kept among the households according to need as judged by themselves. At night I passed the orchard. She sat beneath the beech with her hands in her lap, and her wings looked less than twigs. The children had begun a small hymn without instruction. The tune seemed to hold the trees together. I will advise the little ones to gather at the schoolhouse at first light. I do not know what I intend beyond that. October the 31st. Before sunrise, I called the children to the schoolhouse. I told them we would make a fortress of the alphabet, and my jest landed like a stone in a bucket. I went out once more to the orchard, for I wished to see the returning of tokens concluded with peace. The line had broken. Mothers pressed forward in tears, and men in a tighter silence, each carrying a word like must upon the tongue. The shining figure stood with the fold of her robe lifted. Some children laid their feathers back with the gravity of a tithe. Others clutched and could not find courage for release, for hands had closed upon their shoulders from behind. I spoke reason. I failed. Elder Hawks held a ledger as if it were a sword. Deacon Thorne muttered that blessings without order become a trap. It was a true sentence, and yet it was false in the mouth that uttered it. A boy of 8, Thomas by name, held his feather at his breast and said that the lady had bid him return it by his own hand. His father, a man of labor, reached for the child. The boy ducked and drew back. The father's open palm struck him not in malice but in haste. He fell, and his head found the root of the beech. It made a sound that I will not spell. He did not rise. The lady cried out, and a stillness took the orchard as before a lightning stroke. Then the stillness broke. It broke like dry sticks under a cartwheel. Men shouted that the tokens must be gathered to prevent further harm. Women thrust their hands towards small bundles and small throats. I saw a feather lifted high, and 3 hands climbed the arm that lifted it, and then 4, and the arm went down. I saw a woman seize a feather with her teeth, as a dog takes a bone, and the blood upon her lip did not belong to her. The shining figure moved between 2 knots of struggling folk as water moves, not to divide them by strength but to be where pain was thickest. She reached behind her and brought forth no new light. Her wings were ragged as combed flax. Someone cried that there were sure to be feathers still to be had from where they grew. That cry ran like fire in pine. I saw a man leap as if to grasp a rung upon a ladder, and his hands closed not upon a rung but upon a holy thing. I cannot write what was done except to say that they handled her as if she were a harvest. She would not strike, she would not flee. She laid her open palms upon 2 brows and spoke to them low, and while she spoke, others tore at her from behind. A bloodied white rain fell that was not from the sky. I saw her hair in the trampled grass, and a piece of cloth like a shed skin, and a torn hand that still seemed to bless the world as it fell. Men fought other men over what their pride had taken, and the ground forgot it had been a place of prayers. I shouted that they should remember they were fathers and husbands. They remembered only that which they coveted. I ran. I ran with what boys and girls I could gather by the scruff of sleeve and the honest terror of my eyes. The little ones came as they always come, by the straightest path. I flung them through the schoolhouse door and barred it with my own table, with benches, with a grain chest, and the lectern where the hornbook rests. The latch burned in my grip, though the day was cold. I saw through the pane that the orchard had become a wheel without a hub. We had scarcely heaped the last stool when a pounding began. It was not quite at the door, and not quite at the wall, and not quite at my chest, yet it was in all 3 places together. I told the children to lie on the floor and to cover their ears. Some prayed, some did not. I counted the blows as if they were numbers upon a slate. When I lost count, I began again. There came voices at the sill, some harsh with command, some sweet with the curse that calls itself compassion. They promised order, they promised safety, they promised that if we opened, the little ones would receive portion as before, but now in earnest. The boards shook in the frame. A crack ran like a river from one hinge to the other. I placed my shoulder to the wood and found that a man's shoulder is a poor replacement. The children then asked me if the lady was hurt. I said that she was beyond hurt in the way we name it. I believe those words were true, and yet I have repented saying them. The light faded early. The pounding did not. Nails complained. The grain chest slid an inch, though it weighed more than 2 men. I have no weapon. I have my body and my shame that I was ever proud of its caution. I tried to pray and could not shape the first sentence. I said instead the letters aloud to the smallest, A and B and C, and they steadied their breathing to the sound. Night stood at the window. The voices without began to thin and to rise again, like surf upon a rock. I felt a small touch at my sleeve. It had come from Ruth. She had crept from the circle of the littlest, like a cat among chairs. Her eyes were wide with the work of not crying. She opened her hand, and there lay a feather no larger than a quill's breadth, white along the fringe with a thin gold that was more thought than color. She whispered that the lady told her to give this where it was most needed. I said that the smallest should keep the smallest. Ruth shook her head and put the feather against my palm and folded my fingers as if I were the child. The boards still yet trembled under the blows. I held the feather and felt warmth move through my hand to my elbow and thence to my ribs. Not a fire that consumes, rather the heat that comes when a frost lifts from a stone. I am a man of numbers. I have set my faith in measures and in the witness of the eye. Yet my arm, which had begun to fail, stood as if a brace had been set from shoulder to sill. I placed the feather within the seam of my coat above the heart, not to hide it, but to hold it near the hinge by which a man rises or falls. The pounding changed its mind. It kept on, yet the door no longer sagged from the top, and the crack that had run from iron to iron seemed to forget its course. The stools pressed tighter, though no hand pushed them. The lectern was wedged so close to the jamb that I could not draw a leaf between. I do not make claims beyond what a carpenter would swear to, and I think a carpenter would have knelt. Voices rose without. They tried honey and they tried thunder. Some named law and some named pity. A few began to plead for tokens as if for life. Then there were new sounds that did not come from tongues, a dragging, a scatter as of spilled nails, a lowing that had no cattle to give it. Once there was a cry that had the shape of a name and yet no name in it. I told the children that men grow strange when their hunger learns to speak. We said the letters again, and we said them backward, and then we said them in pairs. My voice failed, and Ruth took up the task with a steadiness that emptied me. There came a smell like iron in rain, smoke with no smoke, heat with no flame. The floor under my knees held fast, and the walls hummed as a hive hums when the keeper lifts the lid. I thought I heard singing beyond the pounding, not from any throat among us, but from a corner that had never taken notice of song. It was not glad. It was stern in the way of sea and mountain. In that hour I broke. I set my forehead upon the board and wept as a schoolboy. My words when they came were not of my own writing. I had mocked such words in a prouder day. I said Our Father, and each syllable was a plank set under a foot. I said Hail Mary, though our elders forbid it, for I saw in the lady a mothering that men do not know how to keep. If I erred, may God write my error in small letters and my need in large. The night went on. It grew very still. We heard feet pass and return, then pass no more. Once a hand worked at the latch with care, as if a friend stood without. I told the children to keep their faces to the floor. A little boy began to shake, and I put my hand upon his back, and the shaking left him and entered me. I take no credit. I only held what he could not, and the feather near my heart held what I could not. Toward dawn, a thin light entered at the seam where the shutter does not meet the frame. The pounding had ended some while before, though I had not trusted the silence. Birds that had fled our eaves for weeks began to speak in single notes, as if testing an instrument after a fire. I waited until the light grew broad enough to count by. Then I rose and took the bar from the door. The bar lifted without complaint. The lectern gave a little. I spoke soft to the children, and they gathered in their coats and blankets. I told them to close their eyes. Some asked why, and I said that kind eyes need not read every page. They obeyed, as if they were born for that word. Ruth found the hands of two small ones, and put their fingers in the hem of my coat. I placed my hand upon the latch and stopped. I thought of the orchard and of the beach. I thought of the place where Thomas fell, and of the fathers who forgot their names. I thought of the lady whose wings had become a lesson I did not deserve to keep. I set the feather from my coat upon the hornbook and told Ruth to guard it as she would a flame. I counted 3. I opened the door. November the 1st. Morning stood there like a messenger who has forgotten all gentle errands. I bade the children shut their eyes. They obeyed, each placing a small hand upon the brow as sailors shade their sight from an unwelcome sun. I stepped first into the yard and looked upon our town. What I saw was a harvest undone. The orchard grass churned to clay and pulp. Blood had made a map in the ruts where carts once moved. There were shoes without feet and caps without heads to shadow. Feathers lay everywhere, ground into the earth as if sown for a crop that no man should reap. The beach looked as a scaffold looks after a hanging day, with scraps upon its lower limbs that were not leaves. I knew a torn braid of hair that had belonged to a woman who sang to her baby in the lane. I saw teeth in the dust that did not shine but lay dull as seed. Of the lady there was no bodily remnant. The soil bore the marks of many knees, not in prayer, but in scramble. Men had fought with the eagerness they save for market day, and the ground had eaten them as they had eaten what they loved. I cannot write the shapes the bodies had taken. Some were clasped as if in mercy, yet their hands proved they had none. Others lay as if they had tried to grow wings after all, and failed at the shoulders. I stood until a fly dared me to move. I turned and held the door so the little ones could pass with eyes shut. We made a cord of ourselves, each with a hand upon the hem of the next. Ruth came last from the room, carrying the hornbook tight against her breast. We moved as a body, like a creature with many feet and one heart. We went through the orchard by the far rows, where the dead lay thin. We crossed a stile with care. A dog watched us from beneath a wagon and did not bark. Once a boy cried out that his father called. There was a wind in the corn, nothing more. I told him to keep his eyes closed for his father's sake. We entered the wood on the east side and followed the old Indian trace toward the river. The trees had shed enough to soften our way, and our steps made the sound of paper torn slowly. The children asked if they might open their eyes. I said not until we heard water speak. At the ford, I let them look upon the stones and not upon the town. They drank. I washed my hands, and the water reddened and went clear again, and I thanked it with a gratitude that needed no speech. The days unnumbered. We slept the first night under a shelf of rock that kept off rain. There were sounds that wished to be wolves and were not. I took a branch and carved the letters upon it, one for each child, and drove it into the soil by our feet as a marker that meant live. The second day we found 3 apples that had rolled downhill and forgotten to rot, and a sack of meal that a fallen man had not needed. I told the children we would borrow it and return it as the schoolroom rule declares. They believed me, and for their belief I am indebted forever. On the 3rd day, as we rose, a bell began to speak from a ridge to the east. It had a deep mind. I knew at once the tongue of St. Jude's mission, for I had heard it once while I was young and defiant. I said to the little ones that a house of brothers lay before us where bread is stored and oil kept. We came up out of the alder, and the timber opened upon a small meadow and a chapel with pale walls. A black-cloaked man saw us and ran. He did not ask our creed. He counted heads as I did, and his lips moved as mine had moved. Within an hour the children were fed to gentleness. They slept in rows upon clean straw, and the brother who kept the infirmary washed their feet without question. I carried the hornbook and the feather to the prior and laid both upon his table. I told him what had been given and what had been taken. I asked leave to remain. They gave it. I confess I had no arguments left to make against God. I had seen love that did not defend itself. I had seen a power that poured out and would not keep one cup for the journey home. I had seen what men will do to a thing that offers itself without bargain. I do not say I understood. I say only that my heart could not bear its old posture. I bent it. It bent easily, like a reed that had always wanted the wind. I take the habit tomorrow. I will set my hand to the care of orphans, and to the copying of words. I will teach the letters as if they were bread. If I may speak to the lady who is not here, I would say this. You found us hungry and left us hungrier, yet not for meat. You taught us that riches without love breed a famine that devours its own. If I have learned anything, it is that the smallest vessels are chosen for the largest waters, and that the largest waters empty themselves to become paths. I ask that Ruth's feather be kept with this book, so that those who read may remember they were rescued by a child's obedience, and not by a man's strength. Here the hand of Master Elias grows firm and ends. Addendum. A note entered by the abbot of St. Jude's Mission, Anno Domini, 1857. These leaves were found among the effects of Brother Elias, once Master Elias Finch, who fell asleep in the Lord after long service at our infirmary table and in the scriptorium. He taught the littlest for 30 years, and his punishments were gentle, and his praise more nourishing than broth. The children of that deliverance grew to womanhood and manhood. Many married among the settlements eastward. A number entered our house and took vows. They did not speak often of the orchard. When they did, they spoke in sentences that had been washed, as women wash cloth after birth and after burial, with the same care. The feather that Ruth placed into Master Elias's hand lies with this journal in a reliquary of oak. Time has paled it less than one would expect. There is a faint warmth in it when one prays, a warmth that does not burn and does not flatter. We have not sought signs from it. We have kept it as one keeps a lamp with a memory of flame. Pilgrims came for a season and then learned better. We answered them with bread and not with marvels. The ledger shows that years of want gave way to years of sufficiency, and then to years that were generous without pride. These things we set down with thanksgiving. We do not speak of tokens now. We speak of mercies, which are not property. Brother Elias wrote this wisdom upon the blackboard for novices and children alike. Borrow only what can be returned. Give only what you are willing to lose. Love is the only arithmetic that does not cheat the book. We now send these leaves and the feather to Rome in accordance with the charge set by my predecessor. Let them be kept where scholars know how to forget themselves before holy things. If heaven finds any merit in our custody, it belongs to the small ones who obeyed at the door and kept their eyes closed when a man could not bear to keep his own. I add one witness, though it is not fit for proof. At Compline, when the psalm comes round that asks, "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord?" I have heard, faint and not from any throat, a sound like the stirring of linen in a wind that does not enter by the window. I do not insist upon this. I record it as I would the touch of a warmer stone along a cold wall. May the reader consider the sorrow that visited our valley and the love that emptied itself within it. If his heart bends, let it be toward those who cannot lift their own. If his eyes fill, let him give thanks that water still answers to gravity. This book closes now, not to seal the past, but to give the present a place to set its hand. Here the abbot's note ends, and with it the record.